Toronto's skyline is changing rapidly. Do you think we're building a future we'll be proud of, or one we might regret?
There's beauty in historical buildings. And so you fast forward to today, and one would ask themselves, where buildings are fully all glass, top to bottom, no character, what he calls no bumps and shadows, right? I think bumps and shadows are important. They bring emotion to spaces, they bring emotions to people, they bring happiness. You're not stuck on your phone, you're looking at things rather than like, and you're touching. Hopefully you get to a point of
What's one urban design idea that you've seen in another global city that you think Toronto or any city in Canada desperately needs?
Culture is embedded in the infrastructure. I think that there's an importance to decentralize culture. We have these wonderful museums, we have wonderful libraries, and places where culture is sort of housed and put there. You go visit it. But I think what's so important is when culture is imbued in the everyday. Design is not something that you have to actively choose to go see or that you can afford to own, but it really should be embedded in every moment of everyone's day.
I want to understand your approach to designing the built environment. Do you see that as a reflection of your personality and identity, or is it inspired by external ideas, or a mix of both?
I think it starts with kind of maybe root ideas about a strong foundation, learning about materiality, cultural, the culture of construction, and what makes a place different than the place next to it, right? Even when we're working on a project in Toronto, which is obviously a city composed of neighborhoods, what makes it different than the one next to it? How can we tell a story about place that really sort of speaks exactly to the place that it's rooted?
Why is it important to stay creative and authentic in designing the built environment, even with the pressure to prioritize trends?
Defining that creativity and authenticity doesn't necessarily need to be separate to trends. I feel like these two can kind of fold into each other. And I personally see the value in trends. Like, I do see at a micro level that trends can be a really beautiful way to color an environment, and whether that is through details or soft furnishings or literal colors. I think that trends have this nice way of kind of speaking to time and being kind of timely. And at a macro scale, I feel like trends can be, if they pick up enough momentum, they can become movements, and that's when you have architectural movements and art movements throughout history, and they become really beautiful markers of time as well.
Alessandro, what's your opinion on the word trend, the T word? Do you avoid at all cost, or what's your approach to it?
Does anybody like that word? I don't like that word, trending. I don't know if I like that word.
Yeah. No,
That's
cool.
not an answer.
It's not an answer?
That's okay.
I don't know. I think there's a time and place, though, for everything.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I hate the idea of trendy because it feels like it's so temporal, where it's of the now and not aligning with a value system of something that can endure time or has a classic sensibility. But then on the other side, design, I think, is intended to apply to multiple different intentions. And for some people, business intentions are to be of the now and of trendy, and it's intended to be temporal. So in that sense, I feel that some things are intentionally trendy, and that's important. So it's a catch-22, I think, sometimes.
It is. Yeah.
Well, something that I think, we're using that word, if you're describing a behavior or a new way of looking at something, I think it's, we've seen in the last few months at least that we're starting to look very closely at Canadian design, like instead of looking out to the States or even abroad, like this table here, and the chairs that you're sitting on, which are also Canadian designed. It's like there's such incredible talent in this country, and I think it's just as a knee-jerk reaction, we look beyond. And so maybe that's one way we could use the word.
Ashley, is there any design concepts or materials in the built environment that once seemed too risky to try, but now you're excited to experiment with or integrate into your work?
I don't know. I feel like we've always kind of not shied away from being risky, but I think the interesting thing that we play with sometimes in our team is like the pretty ugly. You know, not everything has to be this sense of like perfection or what's trendy, but that everything kind of has a place in a project. So I find that sometimes it's a curse because we actually were recently cleaning out our material library in our studio, and you kind of just want to hold on to everything because something might seem really ugly or not the right fit, but then you're like, there's always a place for something. So I think, you know, as we mature as designers and as our studio is maturing, I feel as though we're just able to really do things that are important for the emotions of the people in the space and sort of let go of the aesthetics sometimes and almost tear the other way where we're thinking about things like sound and you know, even the temperature and the absorption of the space and things beyond what we see to see how the space feels and emotes. And so that seems risky sometimes because maybe if you photograph it, it doesn't look the way people expect it to look, or it doesn't emote in the way that you would expect it to be if you're actually physically in the environment. But that's just so much more important to us is how the body is in that space.
That's such an important in our studio as well. We practice all the time. I always say that like the photograph doesn't really evoke what you really feel inside the space.
Yeah.
Sometimes it drives us crazy to say, well, it's photographed a particular way, you Photoshop some things just to make it perfect for a magazine. But it's not necessarily how it feels inside the space.
Yeah.
I connect with that, for sure.
And we were talking about documentation earlier too, how important it is to document the work and how that's evolving so much and how we can really think of the narrative through film and through the creation of the documentation of the spaces to really emote that more than just thinking about what the award submission looks like in the magazine.
Because ideally, you want people to feel what you're designing rather than just see it in a picture.
Yeah.
It's so perfect.
Yeah.
Why?
And the best compliment is the space is better in person than it looks in the picture. And that's always
I think
So
this
we hope.
is such a timely conversation to have as we're in this space.
Yes.
Which photographs so well, but it feels so much more when you're in it.
What is one mistake in urban design you think we should avoid, and how would you approach it differently?
One mistake that I think that we make in the urban built environment is prioritizing profit over people. And I say this with full appreciation and understanding for how important profit is in the full equation of the design and working with clients. But I think that when you lead with profit, you end up with design that doesn't age well. You end up with design, and we kind of see it, it's a rinse and repeat process, and we end up reacting rather than responding. And I think that we can flip that script. I think that we can put people as a leading factor, and I think when we do that, we're designing in a way that's built to last, and I think that gives a sense of longevity to projects and to spaces and to cities, and I think when you do that as well, you're designing in a way that tells a story, and I think that's really valuable, and profit can be a byproduct of that. It doesn't need to be the leading factor. I think that when you really understand people and how they interact in spaces, how they move in space, and how they feel, and even, you know, beyond space, you know, products, how they interact with products and, you know, connect. I think that's when you get a narrative, and that narrative connects people, and it connects people to cities, and it creates this longevity that I think profit is written in that story. It doesn't have to be the leading factor.
If you could scrap one common urban design practice or policy in Toronto today, what would it be?
Using Toronto as an example, trying to jam too many things into a city that almost seems as though it wasn't designed for people to begin with. The thing about urban design, it's so prescriptive as well. I think that, you know, some of the magic in the cities that we visit is, you know, maybe evidence of different ways of thinking over time. You know, evidence of things that maybe evolved or changed. These follies that kind of find their way in between those spaces. And, you know, over here, you know, things are prescribed in such ways that I think it limits, real kind of creativity. And so competitions, like I feel like that really brings the best out of designers and opportunities. Why does that system not exist here? I think it's evolving, but I think that would have a huge impact.
I just hope that our clients pick the right firm for the right reason. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's what you hope for. I think it comes back to the conversation we had earlier, which was make sure that what you're erecting into our city is with purpose and reason and all of that. And it's not just, everybody likes to make profit. Back to that question of profit. You have to make profit, but there's got to be a balance.
Are there any current interior design, I won't say trends, I'll cross that out and write movements, you secretly or not so secretly cannot stand?
I hate plants and books being used for decor.
Ooh, you said it. There you go.
I love plants and books. I'm sure many people in here love plants and books and love seeing them in their spaces, as do I. I think it's important that they're used for their symbolism and what they are. The books are usually great ideas that people connect with, and those are the things that you should have in your home, and not necessarily just for an object that represents something of decor. And same with plants. Like, there's so much about biophilia and what those natural elements coming into an interior environment does for the human spirit and for human emotion, and also for the balance of texture and light and color and all those sorts of things. But for them to just be put in a corner to fill up a space, that really irks me.
I feel like as soon as you said books, when people coordinate their books,
stuff like
you know what?
Or when they turn them around
takes a
and
lot of
only
work.
use the paper side because it aesthetically looks a certain way.
Yeah.
Doing things just for aesthetics, maybe that's the underlying,
Yeah.
and plants and books are just a
Design with purpose.
symbolism of that, yeah.
Decorating 101.
Very true. What do you see shaping urban interiors and design in general in the next 10 to 20 years? And how do you design spaces to remain flexible and adaptable to the future?
I think you need to sort of reimagine the footprints and carve out spaces, and hopefully your city gives you different rules around where, volume, spaces, and height, so that you can make up for them. So when you take a space away, you got to put it somewhere else. Because that's where developers are having a big problem, because they want that real estate, because that's all sellable real estate. But there's got to be some flexibility in that, for that sense of creativity within space, to be able to create volumes that you can see through and pierce through and congregate around. How do you do that if you have all these restrictions and rules and regulations, right? I'm sure that must frustrate you as well. And so that you got to be able to bend those rules. You see it in other countries, you see it in other cities. They do a great job with it. You see with great architects, they take it, they volumize it, and they twist it, and they can figure it out, because there's so many blockades, right? So hoping that starts to ease up a little bit.
Yeah, well said.
So it keeps the creative juices going.
Agreed. Agreed. I think it starts here in this room as well.
I do
that's
think
very
it
well
starts
said.
in this room. I do, and anybody who's watching. I just think it's really important. I talk about this concept of responsibility of design versus just the sake of designing it for the purpose of an award or a cover on a magazine or something like that. I don't think it's about that. If that happens, amazing, right? But I think first and foremost, you have to keep in mind that space is important to humans.
Yeah, agreed. What is one bold change, big or small, that could reshape the future of our built environment and transform how we live?
The way in which we build buildings, right? With the materials that we use. I think that, just over the last few years, seeing this kind of cultural shift, this construction shift to, towards mass timber, for example, that's a pretty gigantic leap. And I think even just a few years, we've seen a lot of that evolve. So hopefully, these sort of trends where people are really kind of earnestly examining the long-term value of things and the sort of impact it has on, both our kind of micro and macro environment. Hopefully that's something that continues.
We've thought a lot about memory and how memory is how we relate to spaces, because so many times we're just going about our day, walking through them, maybe not absorbing what's around us or really it impacting our lives. And we can live 90% of our lives and not remember it. But what is it about that 1% or that 10% that happens that is what we remember?
I think it's human-centered design. I think especially now when we have technology and AI that is taking over in such a large capacity, and I think that's going to really change the built environment in a big way and how we imagine the built environment and how we design.
Continue to create not just the environment, but the materials that we use within the environments, whether it's for ecological reasons or whatever it's for. But I think the more innovative we are as a creative, then I think the better we'll all be able to create something different in the future.